Hi, I'm Kathleen Jasper, and today we're talking about Bloom's taxonomy. Many people have questions about this concept in education, and I'm going to show you today what Bloom's taxonomy is, how to apply Bloom's taxonomy when writing objectives for your classroom, and we are going to go over a test question you might see regarding Bloom's taxonomy on your certification exams. Let's get started. All right, so if you're a new teacher, you might not understand what Bloom's taxonomy is, but I'm sure you have heard it, or you have heard words like higher order thinking and pushing students towards critical thinking. And so these are concepts that are pushed a lot in education, and they are grounded in Bloom's taxonomy. Now, we use Bloom's taxonomy to understand and even to categorize certain skills students are using in our lessons and in the classroom. And we always want to be moving students towards critical thinking when we build our objectives and when we plan our lessons. So I'm going to show you right now what Bloom's taxonomy is, and then we're going to apply that to some objectives for our classroom. So you're going to be able to use this information today and apply it in your classroom, because I know you love that so much. So let's hop over to my presentation so you can see how we do that. Okay, so this is what Bloom's taxonomy looks like. It's a simple pyramid form. And the idea is that as we move up the pyramid here, we move towards more complex skills. Those higher order critical thinking skills. So this is where we want to push students. We want to be pushing them up the Bloom's taxonomy. However, these lower level skills here should not be skipped or thought of as bad in any way. These are necessary skills that students need to start a lesson off. You don't jump right to analyzing something when students have no idea what we're talking about. So these lower level skills, these are important when we start a lesson, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in an objective in just a second. So you can see that we have remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. As we get to this portion of the Bloom's taxonomy, we are moving towards critical thinking. All right. So again, we start off when we write our objectives, when we plan our lessons at the beginning of a lesson, we're going to be down here in understanding, remembering. That also means kind of identifying just one process in the brain. And then we might use what we understand and remember and can identify, and we might apply that knowledge. All right. And then we would move into analyze, evaluate, and then creating something of our own. Creation is at the top of the pyramid because it involves the highest level of skills. So let's have a look at what these objectives might look like. Now, I have examples from elementary, middle, and high school, and I have an ELA example, a math example, and a science example. So I'm trying to cover all my bases here, but it doesn't really matter what content area you are in. You're going to use this regardless, but I just wanted to give you a different objective experience depending on what content area and what grade level you teach. So let's have a look at this elementary ELA. We're at third grade, and we want to keep in mind our Bloom's taxonomy here when we are writing. Now, typically you are not going to have, you might have the numbers, but you probably wouldn't have the skills here, but I have added them here so you know which skill on the Bloom's taxonomy are doing. You would probably just write, students will be able to identify the main idea and key details in a story, right? You wouldn't put remember next to it, but identify is a lower level skill that we have here under understanding and remembering. Okay. So identify, whenever you see identify, think lower level skill. Very important. We are starting off this lesson. We need to be able to identify the main idea and key details in the story. Later, we might be able to evaluate them. But at first, we need to be able to put our finger and go, here are the main ideas and the details of this story, right? Then we move up a little bit further on understanding. Students will be able to summarize, okay? A little bit higher level skill here from just identifying. We're taking a bunch of little elements and we're kind of putting them in our own words. So we'll be able to summarize the main events of the story. This is actually a higher level skill when we're talking about comprehension. So reading comprehension here to summarize, we're moving up that Bloom's taxonomy. Now we're getting into application. We're going to take what we did when we identified and we summarized, and students will be able to use. The verb use goes with apply, right? Use context clues to determine the meaning of unfamiliar words in the passage. So we are applying our knowledge to figure out what some of these more complex words mean inside the passage. Notice that all of these objectives are very important, but they have key verbs in there. The verb identify, the verb summarize, and the verb use. When you're taking your certification exams, you want to be cognizant of these verbs. I'm going to show you that in an application in just a second. But the key here is the verb in the objective. That's going to tell you how high or low level these particular objectives are. Let's have a look at middle school math, 7th grade. First one is understand. Students will be able to explain the concept of ratios and proportional relationships. So in order to explain something, you have to understand it, you have to understand its components, and you have to be able to raise your hand and tell the teacher what it all means. So that's still, a low-level skill, but something very important, a very important skill you need to have. Then we have number 2, application or apply. Students will be able to solve. Solve is another apply. Real world problems involving proportional relationships, such as calculating unit rates. So we're taking what we know about ratios and proportional relationships, and we're solving. So we're applying our knowledge there. We're applying our understanding. Notice we're getting more complex as we move up through the objectives. We start off at number 1, where we're just kind of explaining. Number 2, we're applying. And number 3, we're getting more towards that critical thinking, analyzing. Students will be able to analyze multi-step problems by comparing proportional relationships and identifying patterns or trends. So we're using identifying and comparing, putting that together to analyze. And then, of course, we have multi-steps. When you have multi-step mathematical problems, you are talking about higher order thinking as well. So number 3, it kind of encompasses all that higher order thinking, that critical thinking that we need. So notice again, we started off a little low level, moved to application, and then number 3, we got much more complex. And that's what we want to do as we're building these objectives, making sure we're moving students towards that higher order thinking. And the last one, when it comes to high school biology, the identification or remember, students will be able to list. List is like identifying the stages of mitosis and the key events that occur in each stage. So, for example, if you had a diagram of a cell dividing in mitosis and students labeled it or list the stages based on the diagram, that's a remember. That's an identification skill, low level. Might look complicated, but it's still that lower level skill. 2, understand. Students will be able to explain, again, explanation, how the process of mitosis contributes to cellular growth. So you might say, all right, how does mitosis contribute to cellular growth? And the kids raise their hands and you have students explain that. Maybe somebody follows up. That means they're understanding it. That means they're able to communicate what the process is. And then 3, now we're moving up that Bloom's taxonomy into critical thinking. Evaluate tells me critical thinking. By examining case studies, students will be able to evaluate the consequences of errors during cell division. Now, this one is much more complex. They're going to read case studies and they're going to evaluate what happens when there are errors in cell division. Does that mean issues in terms of chromosome splitting? Does that lead to birth defects? Does that lead to certain cancers? Whatever it is, we can figure that out when it comes to consequences of errors during cell division. And this is going to help us move students towards that critical thinking, higher order skills. Again, this is 10th grade. So we're going to be a little bit more complex than we would in a 4th grade science classroom. But still, even if you're in a 4th grade science classroom, you can still evaluate. You're just evaluating at a different level, right? And more developmentally appropriate level for 4th grade. But again, this moves from low to high. And that's what we want to be doing when we write our objectives. Now, sometimes if you're at the very beginning of a unit, you might have all low-level objectives for the first day. You might have all mid-level objectives for the next day, and you might have all high-level objectives for the following day. It just depends on how everything is set up, but we do want to continuously move students up that Bloom's taxonomy. Now let's work through a test question that sort of has this Bloom's taxonomy vibe to it. It may not say Bloom's taxonomy, but if they're asking you to identify an objective or identify an activity that promotes critical thinking, we want to make sure we understand Bloom's taxonomy, because that's what they're doing here. All right. So you know that on one of these, I always want to work backwards. Right away, this which two stands out to me. All right. Which two objectives would help her meet her goal? And I'm going to just look at these briefly and see what's going on here. I have students will be able to list the stages of the scientific method. Students will be able to identify the hypothesis stage of an experiment. Students will examine case studies and evaluate. If I see the word evaluate in an answer choice, I'm going to slow down, because 9 times out of 10, the question is going to be asking me about critical thinking or higher order thinking. And so this is standing out to me as a good answer choice. And I also see here I have to choose 2. So I'm not going to be able to eliminate and zero in all the way, but I'm seeing what's standing out and looking good to me. Students will design their own experiences. That's that application. I like that as well. Design, ensuring they use all steps of the scientific, and evaluating its effectiveness. Again, we have those higher level verbs. Okay, that's what we want to be looking at. Not so much the activity itself, but the verbs in the activity. So these two, which would be C and D, I guess, if they were labeled. Students will read a passage about the scientific method and select important steps. Select is identify. So select, identify, and list. Those are all the same. And evaluate. I'm looking for 2. It looks like these are going to be my 2, but let's read the question. A 6th grade science teacher has been working with students on the scientific method for over a week. She wants to increase academic rigor in the class and move students toward higher order critical thinking. That's the key there. Well, I don't even have to reread any of these. I know that C and D would be my 2 right here, because I have evaluate, design. And if I go back to my Bloom's taxonomy, you can see here that evaluate is at the top. Design or create is at the top. That's moving us towards critical thinking. And therefore, C and D, or the 3rd and 4th box, would be my 2 objectives that I need to select for this particular question. All right, so that's the overarching concept of Bloom's taxonomy when it comes to writing objectives and answering those questions correctly on your teacher certification exams. Remember Bloom's taxonomy when building your own lessons in your classroom. If you enjoyed this video and you're looking for more information on how to be a highly effective teacher, I have a book called Teach a Survival Guide for New Educators that has tons of 5-star reviews from teachers. And in it, I go through how to build objectives and how to plan your lessons around, Bloom's taxonomy and standards. I also have an online course that you can purchase that's just $39.99 that goes through all of that. Let me show you where to get these resources. All right, so my book on Amazon, it's free if you have Kindle Unlimited, so you can just download it there, or $9.99 on Kindle and $14.99 on paperback. We have received a ton of 5-star reviews on this book, and it just thrills me because these reviews are coming from veteran teachers and new teachers. So if you want to check those out, people have taken pictures with their book. It just makes me so excited about that. So I have a lot of information in this book here, and you can get that on Amazon. Also, if you go to KathleenJasper.com under online courses, I have an online course called Teach a Survival Course for New Educators. And in it, I go through how to build objectives, classroom management, how to, lesson plan. I even have a little bit in there about ChatGPT, how to use that tool to make your life easier as a teacher. It's just $39.99, and it will help you for sure in your first year or first 3 years. And it's just the basics. So every teacher, no matter what content area or what grade level you teach, can benefit from this particular course. All right, I will link all of that up in the description. So if you're interested in the book or interested in the course or both, you can check out the links in the description below. Thank you so much for watching today. If you have more questions regarding Bloom's taxonomy, objectives, or anything on your teacher certification exams, please leave them in the comments below. I really appreciate your being here and watching my videos. Thank you so much, and have an awesome day.